I wanted to take this more as a gambling opportunity and a gambling story for us as an industry moving forward. And listen, legalized gambling has not been the reason why we have gotten more and more of these stories coming out of the professional sports leagues of these people, violating league policy.
Right.
Dave, you've been in locker rooms. I've been in locker rooms since the beginning of time.
Mm-hmm.
Gambling policy has always been there. It has always been there. You go to college, you sit down, and in your freshman orientation as an athlete, the first thing they tell you, do not gamble, do not this, do not that. Rookie camp, you go in, they tell you, do not gamble, do not do this, do not do that. By the way, there's a guy who might be the best hitter of all time that's not in the Hall of Fame because of gambling and because there was a policy in place of not being able to gamble. And so, first and foremost, legalized gambling getting dragged because we're getting all of these new stories coming out about these guys gambling. No, legalized gambling actually should be getting praised in all of this because that's why we're catching these people do this thing. The reason that we have monitoring systems and the reason that we have these different people in place whose sole job is to make sure that everything is on the up and up, right? Whenever you go in and you think that you are making a bet with a bookie and everything's safe, or you're making a bet offshore and everything is safe, that's not the case. The reason that all the regulators are here, the reason why we have all of these functionalities in place is to ensure a safe gaming environment for not only us, but for the integrity of these sports. And now, listen, UFC had a problem.
Yeah.
And it was a real problem, and it was one of the few leagues that didn't have a gambling policy in place. And in short order, they came in and they fixed the problem. By the way, the reason that all came about was because it was detected by a monitoring system because of the legalized gambling space where there was abnormalities shown in a low-level fight that people were going, wait, why is this money coming in on this weird fight? And then it raised red flags. And in short order, not only were the people involved suspended, but UFC came in, not only fighters, managers, coaches, everyone no longer allowed to bet on the sport because guess what? Yes, there is inside knowledge to all of that. If you're in a training camp, you know if your guy is hurt and going into a fight compromised. Now, are you necessarily betting on that or do you tell your buddy or whatever? All of that now, there's a policy in place and you will get suspended and or banned if you go and do any of that. You look at the college baseball sports betting stuff that's going on. If you think that this stuff has not been going on for years and years and years, it definitely has. The reason that got caught, again, was because it raised a red flag in a legal market in which we found out that these guys were doing something absolutely absurd, which, by the way, what were you doing, you morons, in all of this, right? But through all of this, we also need to have rational thought, and we need to be able, as not only, which I take responsible gambling very seriously and have since I've been doing content in this business, but what we need to do also from a sports league standpoint and even from an operator standpoint is have common sense with all of this. In the NFL, not all violations are created equal. And if you want to go in and you want to say, you know better than to bet on the NFL, I agree 100%. People playing in the NFL should not be able to bet on their sport for the exact same reason we just talked about with the UFC. Me and Dave are in the locker room. We're sitting down. If I know a quarterback, his shoulder is hurt, or if I know a player that we hadn't announced yet isn't going to play that week and all of this, it is a very, very slippery slope. I agree. NFL players should not be able to bet on the NFL. That is a very smart, good policy. Now the NFL suspends Jameson Williams for 6 games for not betting on the NFL. And by the way, not only did he not bet on the NFL, it was because he did it in a facility, an NFL facility, right? Now, unconfirmed reports came out this week that it actually wasn't even in an NFL facility. It wasn't even in his, a locker room or a cold tub or whatever it might be. That it was in a hotel while they were on the road. And by the way, if you're staying in a hotel that that your team is paying for, then that becomes an NFL facility.
Wow.
Now, whether that is the case or not in the Jameson Williams case, that is, in fact, as you dig in further, what the rule is as part of the policy. So you're telling me that the same thing as a guy betting on a sport in which he could have intimate knowledge and a guy betting on, I don't know, let's scroll down the menu here, cricket in a hotel room is the same thing. It is absolutely not. And we need to have like rational thought here, and cooler heads need to prevail. A 6-game suspension for a guy not betting on his sport, which is strictly prohibited.
Right.
But betting in a hotel room that was paid for by his team on if had he walked outside or walked to a Starbucks or walked to a Dunkin' Donuts would have been perfectly fine. We need to understand that if we're going to make this work, we need to just have good policy in place. And good policy certainly is don't bet on the sport that you participate in, but because you bet on something different inside of a hotel room that if you went downstairs and walked a couple blocks around the thing would be perfectly legal, let's have cooler heads prevail here and make this something that can work. Make this something that the people understand. Make this something that the players want to get behind and understand. You're not going to prevent them from gambling. It's not going to happen. So just put the good rules in place and make sure that you're not suspending the people who didn't really do anything that harm the integrity of anything that you're trying to get done here.
I think it's well said. And again, you mentioned being in those locker rooms. They're on every stanchion you've ever been in, and it says no gambling, no firearms, things that the players certainly do know. But when it does get to the gray areas that you mentioned, and certainly it feels like that's where Jameson Williams fell here, common sense should prevail. I think that's a very smart thing to do. It's not like Jameson Williams, from what we're being told, was doing anything untoward.
No.
Right? And intentionally doing something untoward.
Not his sport.
Right.
And not even in the lines. Again, this is the report. We don't, they're not going to, I don't know if we'll ever get the real truth out of this because they're probably not going to give us the real, what actually happened. But the report is this was in a hotel, that now pseudo becomes a facility because it's paid for by the team and you're traveling with the team or whatever.
And the other thing that you mentioned with Dana White, and they did have an issue, and we knew about the trainers and James Krause and some of the other individuals involved. And I'll give Dana some credit on a couple fronts here. For the gambling front, for one, when you see that you have a problem, doing something about it. They did it also with USADA, if you remember when they brought in drug testing, because if you go back to UFC 200 and Brock Lesnar and if you remember back then, Mark Hunt, who was fighting Brock, and he's like, well, look at the guy. Like, is he on steroids? Look at the guy, right? Yeah. And it became this thing of this wild, wild west. And Dana cleaned that up by bringing in USADA testing. I think they're doing the best to clean up the gambling aspect so that when we do wager on these things, we feel like at least that part of it is on the up and up, so that there isn't that insider information that's being passed along.
Exactly.
So there's unfair advantages in the gambling community. And as long as you're doing the best you can do as an executive, I got to tip my cap to you. And the NFL should, to your point, have a little bit more comments. I know they want to come down with the Thor, the iron fist, and show that we're doing everything. But
go after the people that deserve it.
Yeah,
Go after the people that deserve it.
Because it does appear sometimes you're trying too hard to punish anybody so that we have this division of gambling and football, even though they are now married.
And again, I cannot stress this enough that legalized gambling is not the reason why we are getting more of these stories. It's the reason why these people are getting caught. The reason that it's like not the
That's right.
It's not the reason they're happening. It's the reason they're getting caught, and that's the reason we're finding out about all of this stuff. So it is a good thing. It is not one of these deals that because of this, that's why this is happening.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.